Let's talk about Steampunk Rally Fusion, a game where time-traveling inventors race across Mars. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we're going to talk about a game that combines pick and pass drafting, engine building, and a crazy race across the surface of Mars. A game called Steampunk Rally Fusion by Roxley Games. Now, I picked up this game when it was on sale over the holidays, and the Atomic Edition combines the two, well, they're both standalone games, Steampunk Rally and Steampunk Rally Fusion, but they're intercompatible, so characters from one game could be played in the other. This is a game for between 2 and 8 players, so it can accommodate a lot of people around the board. It's a game that kids, well, the box says kids age 14 and up can figure this one out. I think 12-year-olds could get this one too, and games take only about an hour to play. Even at a high play count, games should only take about an hour, and I'll explain why that is. Let's take a deeper look at Steampunk Rally Fusion by Roxley Games. Steampunk Rally Fusion is a light game, so even though you're combining lots of mechanisms, it is a game that's not too complicated to figure out, and it is, as I said, quick to play. You're trying to win the race by being the inventor that's the farthest past the finish line. Once one player crosses the finish line, that indicates it's the final round, and whoever's the farthest along the way at the end of that round will be the winner of Steampunk Rally Fusion. The idea here is that this game takes place after a War of the Worlds style Martian invasion in the 50s, and time travelers decide to grab inventors and geniuses from throughout history to have this race and prevent the Martian invasion from happening by crowning the winner of the race as the ambassador to Earth. And we do have a lot of variation in terms of the inventors that are available. Nikola Tesla is in there, as well as Thomas Edison. There's Marie Curie. There's inventors from around the world and geniuses from throughout history. And the one that I've chosen to show you today is Alexander Graham Bell. One of the neat things about the game is that you've got this giant bag of inventors' standees, and of course there are cards that go along with it for their engine, but there's a little paragraph, a little mini biography of each one in the rulebook. Each player will have their genius standee, and they get these 2 cards, and this is really the cockpit and the first part of the crazy contraption that they're going to build in order to race and become the Steampunk Rally champion. You put the 2 cards together like this, and this is the beginning of their contraption, and then they're going to draft additional parts as the game continues. You may be able to see on the little camera here that there are valves. These valves have to be connected. Anything you add to your racing contraption has to have a valve connector that's going to lead it all the way back to the cockpit. So at the beginning, you have one open connector here at the bottom of your cockpit, and then one at the top of the other device that's attached to your machine. Now, these can change through the game. Players can rearrange these things at any time. The key is that everything has to be on a path that connects it back to the cockpit that has your genius's face on that card. Players are going to start with a couple of other things too. They've got a damage counter. Particularly on Mars, there's lots of terrain that can create some damage to your device. And if at the damage phase you've got a negative number on your damage counter, you're going to have to toss out parts of your contraption. They're going to be lost to you, and then you have to draft more in the next round. Each player also has a little light bulb counter that can be flipped over to be turned on or off. It starts in an on position, and each turn you can flip that counter over to activate any cards that have a light bulb on them. So you don't need dice. A lot of the time you need dice to activate the cards in this game. So how do you play Steampunk Rally? Well, you've got these 4 decks of cards, and at the beginning of each round is the drafting phase. You're going to have a card from each deck to form your hand. The 3 decks on the right are the machine parts that are going to go into your contraption. The gold ones do tend to allow you to move on the track. The silver ones often will allow you to get more dice, and dice are important. You fill up spots with dice on your contraption to activate parts of your engine. The copper ones, they have some ability, but they also have 4 connectors on them, and those are really important to continue to build up your contraption that you're racing in. And then there's a stack of boost cards. And these are cards that either give the player some kind of bonus, they might also allow you to damage the other player's contraption or mess with their race in some way. At the start of each round, each player is going to have one of each of those kinds of cards. And you're going to only get to keep one of those cards, because once you take a card and do something with it, the rest of your hand is going to get passed around the table. So the next player is going to have these 3 cards, and you're going to get the cards from the player on your right or your left, depending on which direction you're playing in. So you don't get to keep all 4 of these, but you know what the next player is going to have to choose from in their hand. What can you do with those cards? Well, I can take one and add it to my contraption. That is going to create make my engine more powerful, make sure that I'm able to get further, hopefully along the track. In this case, we've got a card that will allow me to save a die. If I don't use all of the dice that I generate on my turn, I can put one of those dice on here and save it for the next turn. Then I'll have it for later. The other bonus, of course, this is a copper piece that I put on my device, and that gives me some 3 open connections. Now I have a total of 4 open connections. On the next turn, when I get the 3 cards from the player beside me, I've got lots of options here in terms of placement. You can't turn your cards upside down or sideways. They're always going to go with the title in the top left. The other thing that you can do with these cards is sell them, and you can earn dice for your dice pool or cogs. The currency in this game, you're going to spend cogs to do a lot of things, and they've got in the Atomic Edition these metal cogs. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about cogs. This is the currency, so there's no coins, it's cogs instead. You've got little ones to represent 1 cog, and then the larger ones, we counted those as 5, although there's 3 and I think 10 cardboard cogs that came in the box as well. And then there's the boost cards. So the boost cards are some special action that you can take. Sometimes they indicate when they can be played. They might even be able to be played on another player's turn. But you're going to stash those face down underneath your damage counter. You can have a whole stack of these if you decide to play them maybe later on in the game and play them all at once. That did happen in some of the games that we played, and all of a sudden a guy who was in second to last place zoomed all the way up to the first because they got so many bonuses from that boost. The boost cards are interesting, though, because they might improve your game or give you extra dice or do something for your engine, but they can also mess with the other players. This is an interesting boost, actually. It's one that allows me to take some dice off another player's contraption and put them into my dice pool so that I can use them. That might be helpful for the other player because it clears a space where they can put more dice on their turn, or it might somehow mess with their plans. Once you've chosen your card and passed it around and everybody's used up their 4 cards, either sold or stashed their boost or placed a card into their contraption, then you enter a vent phase. That's not really what you do on the very first turn. There's nothing to vent on the first turn of the game. I'll explain venting in a moment. And then finally, you're going to start to race. And this is done simultaneously. Everybody's rolling their dice and placing their dice and activating things. You all do that at the same time. This is why a game with 8 players can be played in approximately an hour if everyone knows how the game works. You'll start by rolling any dice that you've earned at the beginning of your turn, and then you get to start placing those dice, and that can have some escalating effects because placing a die might earn you a couple of dice. Maybe it earns you a cog, etc., etc. So in this case, I've only got 2 blue dice. If I roll 2 3s, I can place them on a blue dice square, and these treads on my contraption here will allow me, for every 5 pips that I place on my turn, I'm going to get to move 1 space, and I can heal 1 damage. So if I did have a number here on my damage counter, it gets repaired. So Alexander Graham Bell, if he puts those 6 pips on that part of his engine, he's going to get to move 1 space ahead and heal 1 damage. If I then activate my light bulb parts of my contraption, I can either take a yellow die, a red die, or 2 cogs. Maybe I want to take a red die because I can place a red die over here on the other side. That might allow me to move another space. So I'll draft that red die, I'll roll it, and then I'll place that onto my engine. If I rolled a 6, the number is 3 here. For every 3 pips, I get to move ahead 1 space. So I've got 6 pips. That's 2 spaces ahead that I'm going to move. but now I've hit some rough terrain on the map, and rough terrain is going to do damage to me. So it says 3 damage. I'm going to move that damage counter. So now instead of -1, I'm at -4, and I should have to discard 4 parts of my contraption here. There are ways to mitigate or reduce the impact of that rough terrain. Like you saw, when I placed 5 pips on blue dice on these treads, I get to heal 1 damage. Also, there's a different kind of movement called smooth movement that allows you to drive across rough terrain without taking any damage. So some of these cards that you can add to your engine will allow you to pass across that terrain with no impact. So certainly with no way to heal himself, Alexander Graham Bell is not going to want to go all the way onto that rough terrain and take that 3 damage. That would be crazy at this point of the game, probably. So maybe he's able to keep that at 0 or possibly even a +1 because of the 5 pips, the 6 pips that I put over here on my treads. And then you get to the damage phase. In the damage phase, you just look at that counter and you discard that many cards. Your damage then resets to 0 for the next turn. So once you've gotten rid of the cards in your engine, you can't get rid of your cockpit, but once you've gotten rid of the other cards, then that counter resets for the next turn. After damage, you flip your light bulb back over, you discard any extra dice that you earned along the way that you didn't use, and then you go back to the drafting phase again. Now in the second turn, now I have some dice that can be vented. And venting means I can spend cogs to drop the number on my dice down by 2 pips. So I can either drop 1 die by 2, or I can drop 2 dice by 1. Why is that important? Well, these dice are taking up space in my engine. Now I've only got 2 spots here for blue dice, and if I somehow manage to earn 4 dice, I'm going to have 2 that I can't use. Same over here. I've got 4 spots here for red dice. One of them is taken up with a 6. That's a large number. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. But I can slowly whittle that down during the venting phase. So I'm venting the heat or the waste from my contraption and getting rid of it so that those spots will eventually open up again. Once it gets down to 0 or below, you can remove that die and you've opened up a spot in your contraption here where you can add another die in the racing phase. Play continues until a player crosses the finish line. Then you do 1 more round, and the furthest player past the finish line is going to be the winner of the game. There are a few other special spots here that you might be able to see on this map. On the red tiles, now there are different tiles because this is Steampunk Rally Fusion. We've got Mars maps and we've got Machu Picchu, and those ones are more green. There's a big stack of these things, and your racetrack is like a puzzle. So I just put together a very short one so that it would fit on the table and be easy for you to see. But that's not usually, it's going to be a bit of a longer race. You're not just going to have 2 tiles to go across before you hit the finish line. It's going to be a longer race than that, of course, when you play an actual game. Some other special spots here on the Mars tiles, if you go through these canals, this is interesting. It either takes 1 smooth movement or 2 regular movement to enter into one of these spaces. But if I finish my turn in one of those spaces, I get to discard a die from my engine. The other special spots on the Mars maps are these fusion factories. So if I finish my turn on a fusion factory, I can spend 2 cogs and buy fusion dice. And the fusion dice are bigger, but they also have larger numbers. It's a 6-sided die. It starts with the number 4. That's the lowest, I think, on here. But the highest is a 9, which could be huge on some parts of your engine. So I'm going to get 1 movement for every 3 pips I place in here. If I do manage to roll a 9, I'm going to be able to move ahead 3 spaces. The tricky part with the fusion dice is that you cannot vent them. Once you put one of these into your engine, it stays there and you're stuck with it for the rest of the game. So now this is permanently taking up a spot. Not only is your map modular, so you're building this puzzle and you've got the tiles from Steampunk Rally and those from Steampunk Rally Fusion. There's a huge variability that you can build into the track, but there are other modular rules and components as well. Each player could have a secret mission that they're working on that the other players don't know about. There are also challenges that can be on different spaces here on the board that can alter up the game somehow. So it can be kind of a straightforward drafting, engine building, racing game, or you can add some extra wrinkles to it. What skills, though, are you practicing when you play Steampunk Rally Fusion? Well, this is a game that is very much involving the executive functioning skills. Executive functions are the skills and behaviors that you need to work towards a goal. And when you're doing engine building, that is really heavily involved because you're trying to draft those cards that are going to work together somehow. Maybe on this engine, I'm going to want to find some cards that generate extra red dice so that I can place those red dice here and move ahead for it. Like 3 pips, that's pretty easy to get 3 pips on a couple of dice. You're going to be trying to find those cards that will work together. And of course, planning ahead is really, really involved when we're talking about those boosts, because you do stash them and then you only play them later on. You've also got some, not a whole lot, but there's some visual spatial skills involved in putting your engine together because you need to create that pathway of valves that will allow everything to be connected back to the cockpit. And if you take damage, you're going to need to rearrange things like a little puzzle that you're working on. So it is a game where there's a little bit of the spatial skills involved. It is much more heavily invoking the executive functioning skills, though. And there's a little bit of factual knowledge about history, too, because these are real people from history. All of these little counters are, I'm holding up the Wright brothers right now. All of these counters are some genius or inventor or scientist from history, and the rule book does have a little mini biography of each one. So if you're interested in, who was this guy? Who was Marconi? What's the difference between? I know there was some relationship between Tesla and Edison. If you want to know about those things, the rule book gives you a little bit of information about that, which might spark curiosity. You might decide that you want to do a bit more research, or your kids might decide to do a bit more research on the characters here in this game. Final thoughts about Steampunk Rally Fusion. Well, this is a game that I think has tons of replayability because there's so much modularity and there are so many different historical figures that you can put into the game. You've got the puzzly track that you're building, and that's going to change up every time. You've got the modular additions of the secret missions or the different challenges. It's so you can make the game more complicated or less complicated for new players. You've got such big stacks of cards. We didn't go through all of these cards. I think there's probably some of these devices that we haven't seen yet, maybe because we sold them instead of putting them onto our device. So how do those things work together? So there's a lot of variability here. And I mean, the components are great. You've got the track, all the iconography is very clear. The cards are fun and funny. I mean, here's a penny farthing, so you've got that great big wheel, like an old-fashioned bicycle wheel on the front of your crazy car that you're building, but that's going to allow you to move ahead and get a yellow die. You've got pick and pass drafting. I haven't played too many games in a while. I think the last one, and this is one of the best that focuses on pick and pass, is Sushi Go, but this one adds the engine building to it as well. And the engines are silly, and you're trying to figure out how to get through this track without destroying this thing that you've built. The insert is very good. The art is a lot of fun. The dice are crazy. The fact that you're working with these metal cogs and they do actually fit together and one can be turned to turn another. Roxley always makes games with amazing components, and certainly Steampunk Rally is no exception. You're playing simultaneously. So as long as everybody knows how to play the game, things are going to go fairly quickly. I know one of my friends, when he plays these kinds of games, the simultaneous play games are a bit frustrating because somebody will always say, well, wait, how did you do that? How come you're all the way over there? And of course, you're relying on your kids to follow the rules and not cheat and grab extra dice or whatever. But I like simultaneous play just because it allows things to go a little bit faster and further. And even though it's simultaneous, there is still some interaction where you might say, hey, stop, I'm going to play one of these boost cards, and that's going to have an impact on everyone else's engine. There's one called Acid Rain that causes all the players are going to lose some piece of their device. So there are a lot of fun cards. There's just enough take that, and there's some player interaction on the board here. Sometimes you're all racing to get to a particular space at the end of your turn because that's going to earn you some cogs or dice. wow, just a fun but very silly and strategic engine building drafting game. Are there downsides though to Steampunk Rally? I mean, one might be that some of the initial player abilities seem to be more powerful than others. You know, when you play the Wright brothers, one of the things that they get is the movement that they can earn from their beginner cards are smooth movement points. So that really allows them to eliminate the damage that they might take near the beginning of the track, because they start the game with that smooth movement available to them. So some abilities maybe might seem more powerful than others when you play this one, but I mean, we just had a great silly time and lots of laughs when something crazy happened and somebody suddenly zipped ahead 9 spaces on the track for some reason, because their dice just kept going and going and going, and they almost had a perpetual motion machine that they had built in their engine. So Roxley, once again, these guys make great things, and Steampunk Rally is definitely among those great things. If you like those kinds of pick and pass drafting games, especially, it is a fun but light, silly engine builder. And then it adds the racing element as well. So what a great time we had playing this one. If you have any questions or comments about Steampunk Rally or anything to do with Brains on Games, you can, of course, leave them in the comments section of the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. Previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the X handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.